Most people think they know this part of the map, but I'm willing to bet you're picturing the wrong country entirely. We're heading to a place that feels like a glitch in the Matrix, where the world's two closest capitals stare at each other across a river that refuses to be tamed, and where a secret World War II history is hidden under a canopy of the densest green you've ever seen. So, stick around, because the story of this other Congo is about to flip everything you thought you knew about Central Africa upside down. Believe it or not, humans were a bit late to the party in the Congo Basin. And that's because the forest was so incredibly dense that people didn't really settle down until the San-Go 1 era, which was about 100,000 to 40,000 BCE. Although these early inhabitants weren't your stereotypical hunters, they were more like professional foragers, using heavy stone tools to dig up roots and gather food. As the millennia rolled by, things got more social, and by the time we hit the first millennium BCE, agriculture started popping up among the Western Bantu people. They lived in households led by a big man, who, at the time, was basically a leader with immense personal power. Later on, these small households transformed into three major kingdoms. You've got Luango on the Atlantic coast, Congo in the southwest, and Tio on the plains north of Malebo Pool. And the big men who ruled these kingdoms didn't just rule by force. No, they were seen more as spiritual guardians. But soon enough a new power emerged: trade. In 1482, the Portuguese explorer Diogo Cao appeared at the mouth of the Congo River. At first he was surprised to see that the atmosphere was relaxed. He wasn't fought off, he wasn't met with violence. Because of that, it was easier for him to form a connection. Eventually the Kingdom of Congo and Portugal exchanged students and representatives. King Nzinga Nkuwu even converted to Christianity, which, I must admit, was a big step, and for a while it looked like a legitimate partnership. But, as history often reminds us, greed is a powerful spoiler, and it's typically the root of all evil. So by the 1530s, Portuguese planters on São Tomé needed labour, and that seemingly amicable relationship soured into the horrific transatlantic slave trade, which expanded massively over the next 200 years. In fact, it's estimated that 350,000 people were taken from the Congo Kingdom alone. Luckily, the locals were strong, and they fought to resist on multiple occasions. Ever heard of Kimpavita? Well, she was a Congolese prophetess who led a huge movement to regain independence. Then there was also the Battle of Mbwila in 1665. During that time, the Congolese fought hard against Portuguese mining demands, but eventually the kingdom was fractured. When the late 1800s arrived, another issue was arising. Europe was in the middle of the scramble of Africa. They were looking for rubber, palm oil, and cotton. That's when we meet Pierre de Brazza, a French naval officer. In 1880, he signed a treaty with the Tio ruler, beating the British explorer Henry Morton Stanley in claiming the land for France, which led to what's known as the French Congo, and later the French Equatorial Africa, with Brazzaville as the capital. Then came World War II. While France was occupied by the Nazis, Congo became the capital of Free France from 1940 to 1943. This loyalty earned them more leverage, eventually leading to independence on August 15, 1960. Now don't get me wrong, it was a huge milestone for the Congolese, but their story was far from over. Because by now, you should know, independence didn't mean instant peace. Their first president, Fulbert Yulu, was ousted in 1963 after several strikes. Then it all went downhill from there. Under Mahari N. Ngwabi, Congo was renamed the People's Republic of Congo and became a Marxist-Leninist state, complete with Soviet and Chinese support. Generally, people viewed it as a time of political instability, economic stagnation, and, of course, authoritarian rule. It wasn't until 1979 that things started to change. Denis Sassou Nguesso took the wheel, and he's a very important figure for many reasons. One of which is that he navigated the country through the collapse of the Soviet Union, transitioning from a one-party socialist state to a multi-party democracy in the 90s. But again, the transition was rocky. See, in the late 90s, the country spiraled into a devastating civil war between rival political militias. Sassou Nguesso eventually reclaimed power in 1997 and has held on to it ever since. But we'll talk more about that later. For now, I want to talk about the interesting landscapes And if you're ever interested in visiting Congo anytime soon, I've linked the best flight deal and accommodations for you in the description below. But going back, the Republic of the Congo is right on the equator in West Central Africa. To the north, you've got Cameroon and the Central African Republic. To the west is Gabon, and to the east and south is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or the DRC. And I know a lot of people confuse this country with the DRC, myself included, but they're actually two completely different entities. So, just to keep things simple, let's call this country Congo-Brazzaville from here on out. That way, we don't mix it up with its giant neighbour across the water. Okay, now that that's settled, let's talk about the size. Congo-Brazzaville is around 342,000 square kilometres, which is give or take 132,000 square miles. Since it sits right on the equator, you can expect that the weather here is pretty humid and tropical. On a normal day, temperatures can hover around 24 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, at night it cools down to about 16 to 21 degrees Celsius or 61 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. It's almost like that all year round. The only thing is, it gets pretty rainy from October to May, with a quick break in January and February. But the rest of the year, the country's pretty dry. Because of that, the country's landscape looks something like this. About 70% of it is covered in dense, lush rainforest. These forests are legendary, serving as a sanctuary for about 125,000 Western lowland gorillas. In fact, back in 1993, the government set aside nearly 1 million acres in the north to create the Nuagbale Nduki National Park, which is easily one of the most important tropical forest preserves on the planet. But it's not all trees here, because if we fly across the country from the coast, you'll see that the landscape changes like different chapters in a book. First, it starts with a coastal plain before hitting the foothills of the Mayombe Mountains. Moving further in, you find the fertile soils of the Nyari Valley in the south-central region. This one's a real hotspot for agriculture. Then you hit the central Bateke Plateau, which is a divider that separates the basins of the Ogowe and Congo rivers. Finally, to close off the last chapter, the terrain gives way to the massive Congo River Basin in the north, a mix of dry savannas and those famous, nearly impassable floodplains. Now, if you look far to the north in the Sanka department, you'll spot Mont Nabemba. Its height reaches over 1,000 metres, or roughly 3,300 feet, making it the highest point in the country. So among everything I mentioned so far, can you guess what the main character of this country's geography is? Yep, it's the Congo River, and the capital, which is Brazzaville, sits right on its banks. It's a city of nearly 1 million people, and is directly across the river from Kinshasa, which is the capital of the DRC. They are the two closest capital cities in the world, unless you count Rome and the Vatican. But don't expect to take a cruise from the capital out to the Atlantic. After all, the river between Brazzaville and the ocean is filled with violent, unnavigable rapids. And because of those wild rapids, Congo-Brazzaville relies on a bit of a tag-team transport system. Here's how that works. Goods come into the Atlantic seaport of Pointe-Noire, and then they're hitched onto trains or trucks for a bumpy ride to Brazzaville. From there, the capital acts as the ultimate transit hub, where everything is reloaded onto boats to head further north. You could say it's a logistical puzzle, but hey, the country's figured it out. And while they're moving goods, they're also trying to protect the good stuff. That is, Congo-Brazzaville has signed on to almost every international agreement you can think of, from biodiversity to climate change. The reason for that is simple. They want to make sure that their green lung stays healthy for the next generation. But how exactly is all that green helping the economy? Well, that's what we're about to figure out next. You see, right now, Congo-Brazzaville sits at 142nd in the world for nominal GDP, and for a country with so much natural wealth, that feels a bit low. So let's break it down. Since the 1960s, the average growth rate has been around 3.36%, but back in 1982, it hit an all-time high of 23.6% during an oil boom, only to crash to a record low of negative 10.8% in 2016, when oil prices tanked. Yeah, it doesn't look good, and sad to say that's not the only thing they're worrying about, because there's also another layer to all of this, and that's debt. For a long time, the country's debt to GDP ratio was looking pretty scary, peaking at over 103% in 2020. However, the government has been working hard with the IMF, and as of early 2026, they've managed to pull that down to about 74%. That's progress, right? But it still leaves the public debt per capita at around $2,296 per person. And extreme poverty still affects over 50% of the population. So even though oil money's there, it hasn't quite reached the pockets of the average citizen yet, which means change needs to happen, and fast. Good thing 2026 is here. Because believe it or not, this is going to be a huge milestone for the country. Currently, President Denis Sassou Nguesso is pushing a major national development plan. His goal? To stop relying so much on oil and start leaning into things like agriculture, digital economy, and infrastructure. Not only that, this coming May 2026, the world is actually coming to Brazzaville for the African Development Bank's annual meetings. And let's just say this is a huge deal. It's like the economic Olympics for the entire continent. In fact, the bank has already invested over $223 million into the country to help with those big projects. So by the time the 2026 meetings wrap up, Congo-Brazzaville hopes to prove that they aren't just an oil country. Rather, they're a logistics and agricultural hub for Central Africa. And you know, there's no better place to see that evolution than in the culture itself. Just like the country is working to prove it's so much more than just an oil economy, the culture here refuses to be put in a box. Take, for instance, their ethnicities. There are about 15 main Bantu groups and over 70 subgroups here, each bringing their own flavour to the table. While they still hold those deep pre-colonial traditions close to the chest, they've also thrown their arms wide open to a modern, global flair. Just walk through the streets of Brazzaville and you'll get what I mean. In fact, you'll see this blend immediately in the way people dress, and that's because the Congolese are legendary tailors and textile masters. So if you want to see the runway of real life, head over to the Poto Poto or Mikalu markets. These places are sensory overloads of vibrant fabrics and intricate traditional designs, which are all part of their local soul. And you know what else adds to their unique identity? It's rhythm and music. Long before colonial times, life revolved around ceremonial music, dance, and sculpture. Even when Western influence changed their tools by introducing new instruments and styles, the Congolese still made it their own. Because along with Kinshasa across the river, Brazzaville also became the birthplace of Congolese Rumba. This genre is so iconic that Brazzaville is officially a UNESCO Creative City of Music. And every 2 years, the city hosts the Pan-African Music Festival, turning the capital into the musical heart of the continent. But this creativity doesn't end there. See, besides music, the Congolese are also great visual artists. So if you'd love to see it with your own eyes, head straight to the Marion Ngouabi Museum to see their collection of indigenous masks, or marvel at the Basilica of Saint-Anne du Congo, which is an absolute architectural gem. Of course, there's more to Congo-Brazzaville than these, and it's your job to find these hidden gems yourself. So, if you want to plan your trip here for less, I've got the tools you need in the link below. But before that, sound off in the comments which area you'd like to visit first, the dense gorilla-filled sanctuary, or the vibrant, rhythmic city life of Brazzaville. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next.